It's great to have you with us. We're going to take you up the Mississippi River. It's a very special river, 2,350 miles long. Begins not far from where we are right now, a couple hundred miles northwest of where we are in a little bitty lake, where the outlet from the lake that begins the river is so small and so narrow and so shallow, you can walk right over it. Then the river comes down several hundred miles, goes over the only waterfall along the length of the Mississippi River in downtown Minneapolis. And then it goes through the only gorge along the length of the Mississippi River, runs for 8.9 miles right in Minneapolis. And then it comes down here, and then it begins to spread out. And it gets as wide in some places as 3 miles. So it's a big city, it's a big river, with several hundred fish that live in it. Not always, you understand, but right now, about several hundred. More than that, almost 40% of all the birds that migrate in North America use the Mississippi River as a flyway, going north, going south. 33 states, all the water that flows off the Appalachian Mountains in the east and all the water that flows off the Rocky Mountains in the west ultimately flows into this watershed, which is the third largest in the world, and it forms the Mississippi River. So this guy is pretty big and pretty important. In fact, this is the only way the people who settled the state of Minnesota and the upper Midwest could get any place up here in this part of the United States was by the Mississippi River. Right? And it was clean. When they started coming in the 1600s, that's where the Spanish, and in the 1700s, those were the French, and in the 1800s, the British, the river was relatively pure. And then the American civilization bought the lands for both sides of the Mississippi River. Settlers came in, and the river kind of got polluted. If you look right over here, turn right over there, all the way over, there's a big kind of a bathhouse. It's a place where you can have sandwiches, you can have picnics. And you'll notice there's a whole set of steps that go right down to the river over there. That was designed by one of the very first black architects who worked for the cities in the United States, a man named Clarence Wigington. And that whole area, that island over there, was owned by a man named Mr. O'Hagy. Mr. O'Hagy was the St. Paul City Health Inspector. And Mr. O'Hagy was the one who built the steps there so that people could actually walk down the steps and they could go and they could have a bath, or they could swim in the summertime, and they could enjoy the Mississippi River. This was 1900. In 1920, if you had looked over there, you would have seen Mr. O'Hagy jumping up and down because he was mad. The Mississippi River was a mess. There wasn't a fish living in the Mississippi River in this part. Not a fish, because the river was so polluted. If you took 7 gallons of water out of the Mississippi River in 1920, 1 of those gallons of water would be nothing but sewage and detritus, just a mess. So the state of Minnesota has made a real effort to clean up. We are the only state for a couple of things. About 40 years ago, the state did a survey of the river that flows into the Mississippi River, which is from where we are right now about 5 miles up that way. It's called the Minnesota River. And the state of Minnesota expected that the Minnesota River was going to be polluted by all those farmers up there, right? We are the second largest industrial farm state in America. We are the biggest turkey producing state in America. We are huge in agriculture. So it was going to be all the farmers. Well, it wasn't. You know who it was? There were all kinds of small communities living on the Minnesota River. Those, many of them, were dumping raw effluent into the Mississippi. Well, it took them about 20 years to get those guys cleaned up. Then they did another survey, not more than a decade ago. And this time it turned out to be, yes, there was a lot of farm pollution that was going in, but this is the only state in America that deals with that. If you're a farmer and you've got a lake or a stream or a creek or anything on your property, you got to have 50 feet of weeds and dirt between the end of your cultivated field and the beginning of a creek or any kind of water. It's the only state in America that has that, the only one. So we're kind of proud of that. Mississippi River, she's gorgeous. Now it's relatively clear, it's getting better and better. We're getting more and more fish that are in the river and that are enjoying it. But I gotta tell you, it wasn't always that way. Right? Okay, so there you got the city of St. Paul. Now that's the modern city of St. Paul. The city of St. Paul actually began in the late 1830s when a guy by the name of Pierre Perrant was kicked out of a place called Fort Snelling. Now, where we are right now, about 4 miles right behind you, is the place where the Minnesota River and the Mississippi River come together. And there's a bluff right there. And right on top of that bluff, that's where Fort Snelling was built, right? Now, Fort Snelling, you understand, in 1820, when it was built, was the end of the world, right? Honestly, it would take you between 4, 6, or 8 weeks to go from St. Louis, Missouri, all the way up to Fort Snelling. And you did it by poling almost. In other words, you pushed yourself up. Because remember, you're going upstream. So you get up here, there's nothing going on except the indigenous people and the soldiers of the fort, and that's it. So the soldiers needed something to do, and so somebody provided things to imbibe, you know, that you could forget about where you were, because your route, you know, you were 6 years in the Army up there. So they got a little wild. And the guy who was providing them, he was a sutler, that's a storekeeper at the fort. And his name was Pierre Perrant. He had a big patch over his eye because he had a cataract over that eye. Didn't want anybody to see it. And they called him, because of the eye, they called him Pig's Eye, all right? So the colonel says, you can't serve liquor anymore, the soldiers are getting drunk, kicks him out. So he goes down about 2 miles from where we are, to a cave called Fountain Cave. Now, if you were to come into St. Paul today and you were to go looking for that cave, you would never find it because nobody knows where it is. But the amazing part is we have pictures of it. I know, how can this be possible? Anyway, so he came down to Fountain Cave, set up his little libatorium there. Soldiers would come down 2 miles, they'd get drunk, fall back to the car. Colonel got mad, came down here with a bunch of soldiers on horseback and flaming brands, burned them all the way out. Pierre comes right down here and he goes right down that way until you see the big building at the end down there. That's an apartment building. But right below that is where Pig's Eye ends up. And he sets up a little bar there. And that's what this whole city was known as. Remember that everybody calls him Pig's Eye. So if you were coming up the Mississippi River, you were coming up to the head of the river, which was Pig's Eye. Well, that wasn't a very good name for a community, right? So we had a priest come into town, and he decides to build a cathedral there. It's like 20 feet by 30 feet. It's called St. Paul's, and that's what he named this. And he said, I hope the people of the rest, people who come up here forever, will, in fact, call this city St. Paul, and that's what they did. But that was down there, so that's where the city began, right? People started coming. There's some folks from the fort. They retired out of military service. They came over here. The reason St. Paul is here in the first place is because despite the fact that we are north of the Mississippi River, we are still east of the Mississippi in an arrangement with the Native Americans for the sale of this piece of property. right? Everything east of the Mississippi River in 1837, people could live on. Not the west, but the east. So that's why St. Paul is here, because what? Minneapolis is on the west side, all right? So that got us here. So St. Paul is here. Now it is the head of the river, okay? You can't get to Minneapolis by the Mississippi River. Can't get there. And the reason you can't get there is because of that gorge. Remember I told you about the gorge, 8.9 miles from the waterfall down to where the Minnesota River comes together? Can't get there, right? Because it's all full of a dozen islands, a lot of logs, a lot of rocks that are rough. I mean, you can't get there. It's awful. You got to build a dam. Well, we didn't have a dam, all right? So this was the head of the river. And this stayed the head of the river until the late 1930s when they finally built a dam down there to raise the water level of the gorge so boats could float over it, all right? Now, St. Paul remains the center, and St. Paul continues shipping. So the 1980s, and they're shipping grain out of here, right? Because this is the end of the Mississippi River. Now, in Minneapolis, they're shipping grain by rail, right? Because the rail came in there in the 1860s. Now, the farmers over on this side of the Mississippi River are saying, well, we're not so sure about the way they're handling grain over there in Minneapolis. And so they formed something called the Equity Cooperative. And they built 90 concrete silos right where we are right now, 90 of them, right? Remember, they're still shipping grain until about the 1980s. And then they go to other methods of transportation. Other places in the country take over the dominance of the grain market. So they got 90 concrete silos and they tear all of them down. The only thing that's left is a place called the Head House, and you'll see it. It says Municipal Elevator on it. That's the only thing that's left of that. Oh, and just on this side of the municipal elevator, there's a big building. That's where they used to sack grain and do some shipping. That's all. Everything else is gone, right? So there you got the Mississippi River. Now, this guy is pretty wide, and it can be pretty nasty sometimes. I gotta tell you, where we are right now, this is a low part of the Mississippi River. Where St. Paul was, there were bluffs there to keep it up, but this was the low area, and this would always get flooded, right? On this side of the Mississippi River, there was a road down here called Shepherd Road, and every spring, almost, it would get flooded. And on the other side of Shepherd Road, up that right behind these condominiums back here, way back there, behind those guys, there was a community of people from the 1850s right through to about the 1950s. And they lived in houses that were not very good. No electricity, no running water, no sewer, none of that stuff. But that was simple and it was inexpensive landing. They used to call it Little Italy, though there were a lot more people than Italians that lived there. And there were some people who had the niceties of life, like electricity and the rest. But that was called Little Italy. Almost every spring, it would flood out. The people would be forced to leave. Then when the water subsided, they would come back in, they'd live in them. About the 1950s, the city of St. Paul said, enough. And it moved everybody out, spread them throughout the cities, burned all the houses down. Junkyard was in there for about a dozen years or so. And then the junkyard moved out, and the city did something they'd never done before. They started bringing in fill, yards and yards and yards of fill, until they built up a bank along this Mississippi River that was so high, it'll never flood again. And about 1990, they opened up this whole area for apartments, condominiums. Now what you're seeing back there is the largest housing development in the history of the city of St. Paul. Almost 1,000 apartments and condominiums bought, where it was just awful every spring, right? In fact, the road we're on right now every once in a while, like 2019, this whole area got flooded. So the river is not, you can't control it at all, right? As much as they would like to and try to. Over on the other side, they built some berms. If you look over there, there's some berms over there that keep the river from flooding in. And over there, there's also an airport that many of the commercial industries in the state of Minnesota, and especially the city of St. Paul, use. But this is the river. And the river is, well, last year, 2019, had a lot of rain, right? Got to tell you, too, about this Mississippi River. Now, remember I told you about the big grain elevators and all the shipping? They still ship out of here. Something like 2,500 barges go out of this city almost every year. Held in check by 250 or so tugboats. Right? Last year, 2019, the river was so high, nothing was coming out of St. Paul for almost 6 weeks because the river was running so fast, number one. And number two, because it was so high, the barges couldn't fit under the bridges. It's pretty wild. Bridges, by the way. You want to find two cities with more bridges over the Mississippi River than any place in America, and you can't unless you come to Minneapolis and St. Paul. There are more bridges over this river than any place else in the United States. The one back there, that's called the High Bridge, and that truly is the tallest bridge in the city of St. Paul. It's almost 160 some feet from the middle of that bridge to the Mississippi River. It's a long way down, right? And that connects where the wealthy people used to live from the city people themselves. Because right up at that end, there's bluffs. They call them Cherokee Bluffs up there. And that's where the second wealthy population in the city of St. Paul occurred. The first was right back over here, not too far away, just on the other side of all of these brand new apartment buildings. Anyway, this is the Mississippi River. It's a big river, and it can't be controlled, but I tell you, we're still living on what this river provides for all of us in the state of Minnesota. So the Mississippi River has provided the foundation for the city of St. Paul to grow. Matter of fact, this whole part of the upper Midwest and the rest of the country, for that matter, is dependent on the Mississippi River. So across the way, now there's some unique things other than the gorge and the waterfall and the rest of it. There's some neat things on the Mississippi River here, especially over there. Now, if you look over on that side, there's a nice little community shelter over there, and that's an island. Well, it used to be an island. Right? They called it Harriet Island. It was named for the very first school teacher in the state of Minnesota, a lady named Harriet Bishop. Anyway, that used to be an island, and then they filled in the back channel of the Mississippi River because they needed more land for industry and for homes and the rest of it. So they filled that in. So that's Harriet Island. And that used to get flooded every year as well when the Mississippi River got big. So now they built a berm along there that keeps what's behind it, which used to be a community of people. All dirt roads, 1- and 2-story buildings, all wood and the rest of them. And that was there, remember Little Italy on the other side of the island, on the other side of the river, was similar to that on the other side of the river. Anyway, so that's gone because remember, it gets flooded. So that moved out. Industry moved in. We built a big berm so that we keep the water out. So now, the different industries are kind of special. If you look a little bit to your left down there, it looks like a riverboat. Like a old steamboat, right? That's the Covington Inn. It is one of the few, if not the only, bed and breakfast on the upper Mississippi River, or in the whole upper Northwest. And then you go a little bit further that way, you're going to see a bunch of riverboats down there. And people live on those things. They live on them 12 months of the year. They do. And you think to yourself, well, doesn't the river freeze? Well, sometimes, in fact, it does freeze. Most of the time it doesn't. And when it does get really cold, around those boats there are little bubblers keeping the water moving so that it never freezes solid. Then you go out behind that and there's some major industries. You go a little bit further down that way and you get to an airport. And if you stay in the river and you get down a little bit further, you're going to see a bridge down there. Right under the bridge is a rowing building. This is the Minnesota Rowing Society. And if you want to learn how to row, you know those sculls, those big long things with all those people in them, you can do that. That's all been rebuilt and renovated to make everything work in the 2000s. And then the bridge that's right above it is called the Wabasha Street Bridge. There it is. And that is the third oldest bridge covering the Mississippi River. First one was in Minneapolis, second one's down in Illinois, and this one is the third one. It was a wooden bridge, 1859. Then they tore it down, they built a steel bridge in 1899, right in the 1890s, and then they renovated it again about 30 years ago. So those are the bridges down there. Oh, and there's something on this side of the Mississippi River. And what's on this side of the Mississippi River is pretty special. Look at this. I got it. Let's go here. Look at this. Man by the name of Dan Freeman. He's the guy who built these. There's a whole bunch of these, and these are kind of the birds that protect the Mississippi River. And there's several of them as you walk down here and walk along. So it's a neat area of town, but these are the birds that do it, right? There's several of them. And this whole area, specifically for the people of the city of St. Paul to enjoy the outdoors, to enjoy the Mississippi River, right? Not flooding us, but that we get a chance to enjoy and sit and look at it. There's some wonderful things that this city has that overlook the Mississippi River, and that building is one of them. And you think to yourself, well, it isn't a magnificent, grandiose construction, and truly it is not. But it is the only one of its kind in the United States of America. All of the wood, you know, Minnesota, we get storms, we get tornadoes, we get trees come down, trees break down. When they put the lines in, they cut down limbs and the rest of them. All of that refuse, all of that wood refuse goes to that building. And it's burned there, right? It's the only building like it in the United States. And that's all they burn is the wood. It's never been cited for pollution, never for particulates, none of that. What it does is heat almost all of downtown St. Paul. And it heats the state capital of the state of Minnesota. One of two state capitals in America heated by wood, right? That's one of them. Then right to the next to that is that kind of lower building that's all white with the red roof. That's the city library, right? That was built in 1916. It is exactly the way it was when it was built in 1916. Today it's already been restored to that. And then you go one more over to the big building here with the brick front and the glass windows. That's kind of special. That's the Minnesota Science Museum. And the Minnesota Science, remember I told you about the pollution that's in the river and all the rest of it? Minnesota Science Museum, special building. When it was built about 30, 40 years ago, it was the first building in the city of St. Paul that was built overlooking the Mississippi River. Because, remember, of all that pollution, we were kind of ashamed of what had happened to the Mississippi River. So we turned our backs on the river. And that was the first building that actually opened up windows to the river. Because we are getting proud now. We're starting to clean this river up. It's been a long journey, I know. We've been all over, from the gorge all the way down to the end of the Wabasha Street Bridge. Thank you for staying with us. My name is J.B. Eckert. Look around the rest of the building. Landmark Center, it's a special place. Have a good day.